In 1811, the largest slave revolt in United States history happened in Louisiana. I say United States history, but Louisiana was not yet a state. And if this slave revolt had succeeded, would Louisiana have become a state? Let's explore this alternative history in Historical What Ifs, the 1811 Slave Revolt. Many things led to Louisiana receiving statehood, one being the Founding Fathers' ultimate goal of Western expansion and domination, or in other words, manifest destiny. Other factors include the crumbling French colonial presence in the Americas. The French lost their Canadian territory in 1763, and they lost their biggest moneymaker about 30 years later during the Haitian Revolution, when the enslaved people of Saint-Domingue fought for and won their freedom. During this time, there was also rising strife between free and slave states, and to Southerners, Louisiana represented another possible pro-slavery state that would rally for the cause of slavery. Louisiana was already a likely candidate for statehood, but after the 1811 slave revolt, this candidacy was solidified. I'll explain how the 1811 slave revolt made such a big impact, but first, let me briefly explain what actually happened. On what's called the German coast, right outside of New Orleans, in 1811, an enslaved Creole man, Charles Deslandes, was preparing the largest slave revolt in American history. During the winter festivals in New Orleans leading up to the night of the revolt, Charles Deslandes networked with other enslaved people. Deslandes told the story of the Haitian slave revolt, and how another French colony not too far away organized a revolution and now had their own free black nation. With the leadership of enslaved men like Cook and Comina, who were wise to Akan or Congolese military tactics, the planned revolt organized around 500 enslaved men and women to march on New Orleans. On January 8th of 1811, the revolt started on the plantation of Manuel Andry. The leaders of the revolt waited until then because they knew Governor William Claiborne had just ordered his military to leave Louisiana and annex West Florida. The city was relatively defenseless, and the revolutionaries took advantage of this. The revolt begins when Charles Deslandes, fully armed, wakes up Manuel Andry in his bed. Andry knows exactly what is happening, and flees while the revolutionaries kill his son. From the Andry plantation, the revolt begins its march to New Orleans. Along the way, they kill plantation owners, recruit enslaved men and women, better arm themselves, and set fire to plantations. Word of the revolt made it to the city, and New Orleans was completely evacuated. The militias who were still around were called to duty to put down what was essentially labeled a gang of thieves and brigands. In the initial encounter between the revolutionaries and the militia, Charles Deslandes ordered a tactical retreat to find a more advantageous position. Unfortunately, they never found the strategic position that they needed, and about 100 revolutionaries were killed on the road to New Orleans. The militia beheaded everyone that they killed and set their heads on spikes. They set the spikes as a warning for others not to challenge the institution of slavery, and the heads of revolutionaries could be seen as far as 60 miles from New Orleans. All of the leaders, including Cook, Comina, and Charles Deslandes, were killed for their roles in the rebellion. The 1811 German Coast Uprising has become largely forgotten. The first major book written about it was published 200 years later, in 2011. However, this was the first major violent conflict that led up to the Civil War. Many historians attribute the outbreak of violence in the Civil War to Bloody Kansas or John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry, but the German Coast Uprising heightened fear of slave revolt and militarization to protect the slave economy like nothing else ever could. Governor Claiborne ultimately used the slave revolt as a way to grow American military presence in Louisiana. Claiborne's narrative was that this revolt was just an insurrection of thieves and brigands, and that Louisiana needed more militias and military presence to protect their way of life. The U.S. sent troops, but this wasn't to protect any way of life. It was specifically meant to protect the slave economy and make future revolts impossible, while bringing Louisiana closer to statehood. Claiborne's militarization happened side by side with statehood negotiation, and in 1812, Louisiana became a state, despite still being very culturally distinct from the rest of the states. A few years later, Louisiana's large military proved extremely useful in the Battle of New Orleans, where the Americans were successful in defending the city from the British. So if not for Claiborne's response to the 1811 slave revolt, Louisiana may never have become a state. Countless people have asked what might have happened if the 1811 slave revolt succeeded. What would success have looked like? Let's speculate. The men behind the revolt were aware of and inspired by the Haitian Revolution of the 1790s, which ended in 1804 with Haiti becoming the first slave revolt to succeed in establishing a nation-state made up almost entirely of former slaves. Establishing New Orleans and the surrounding lands as a nation similar to Haiti's was probably the goal. Knowing that Charles Deslandes and the leaders of the revolt knew of the Haitian revolt, they, if they succeeded, might have allied with Haiti and formed a Caribbean anti-slavery coalition. Haiti was the first nation to employ the Enlightenment ideas of abolitionism, and this is clear in their early foreign policy. Haiti agreed to supporting Spanish-American independence by sending military aid. The only thing Haiti required in this deal is that all slaves in South America be freed. It is then a safe assumption to say that Haiti would have fully backed the former slaves of New Orleans, especially because of their similar French Creole cultures. If we zoom out now and look at the map, the geopolitics of North America are totally different. Abolitionist nations now hold the most strategic point in the American South, and the Mississippi no longer serves U.S. interests.
Slave revolts will be organized all around the Caribbean. The dying French and Spanish empires stand no chance. This will obviously lead to the collapse of all French colonial presence in the Americas, turning the Caribbean into an abolitionist superpower in the New World. At this point, conflicts like the Indian Removal Act and the Civil War have drastically changed.
Okay. Wait, hold up. Okay, that's not right. This isn't right. No, that's not it. Let's get back on track here. Alright, so that last segment was pretty terrible. I mean, the what if part of that segment, that was pretty bad. But in other ways, it was sort of tempting too, wasn't it? To think about like what could have happened or what like possibly could have been. That is a tempting feeling. So that was a what if. And a historical what if is basically just a prediction or a story about, what if something in history was a little different, or a mistake was made, or a different, an event happened differently. This is, first and foremost a story. I want to reiterate that because I see a lot of people treating alternate histories the same way they would treat a normal history, which is not good. We can't treat our predictions with the same amount of respect, and we just can't have trust for predictions like we can for actual history and what we've actually learned and seen from the past. And this is not me trying to like totally bash on alternate history. I think it's very useful in a lot of situations because storytelling is useful. Like a lot of the moral lessons society has passed down over the years comes from storytelling. Our culture, like in general, just comes from storytelling, and a lot of alternate histories have become super important things to our cultural identity. A lot of big alternate histories that I like to mention here are Fallout, the video game. That series, I think it's like, I think the alternate history is like, what if the microchip wasn't invented, or something really strange like that. Man in the High Castle is another big one. What if Axis won World War II? That's a really famous book. The Watchmen series is also a really cool alternate history. It's kind of like, what if God came down and helped us win the Vietnam War, and Vietnam became a state? It's insane. Like, it sounds insane, but it's a really cool story. And Watchmen has gone on to become like one of the most prolific comic books of all time. And the show that came out recently was actually amazing, and I definitely recommend everybody go and watch that. So essentially, these stories that have come from alternate history have in turn become part of our cultural identity. I'm just reminded of that meme where it's like, in the copy there is, semblance of the original. And there are also the classic alternative histories that we see everywhere that get sort of drawn out and have been so elaborated on and are just so dry and stale at this point. And these are the ones that I'm really just upset with, and I feel like I need to critique and speak up about. I'm talking about, would you kill baby Hitler, excluding Man in the High Castle, but like, what if Nazis won World War II? What if Japan won World War II? And
No! No! God, please, no!
In the end, alternative histories can be a super great way to tell a story. They can be super fun stories. And they can be stories that tell very important messages. There are countless alternative histories out there that, can speak volumes to our current world and the world we live in. So, alternate histories overall, I think, are a good thing. I think alternate histories need to be treated with respect and a level of responsibility when you're telling these stories. And please, please, stop making "What if the South won the Civil War" videos. It's so drawn out. Like, it's so bad. Like, everything said on this topic, I feel like, has been said. And unless you have something really crazy to say about, like, what if the South won the Civil War, like, don't go there. Just don't. And just remember, down the road, if you're ever making an alternate history, that at any moment, the whole world can change because of a deadly pandemic. Alright, so I just want to thank my brother for making the map I showed in this video. We wanted to make that section like super crazy and look insane, like, oh, what if this anti-slave coalition took over the whole southern United States. And I think the map turned out really good, and I don't want to, I might post the picture somewhere so people can look at them. I also wanted to thank the people who gave me good counter arguments during the production of this video. I kind of like came out of the gate swinging at different alternate history YouTubers, and some people talked me down, which was good. History doesn't happen without peer review, and I'm glad that this video is hopefully made better because of that peer review. So yeah, thanks for watching. Also, don't forget to check out my recommended readings for this month. We have The Black Jacobins by C.L.R. James. It's a story about the Haitian Revolution in Toussaint Louverture. And the reading that, was totally behind this video, American Uprising, the Untold Story of America's Largest Slave Revolt by Danielle Daniel Rasmussen. This book is crazy. It like totally changed the whole, telling of the 1811 slave revolt, and I definitely recommend it. All right.